Every move has one purpose: neutralize the threat and get to safety. No rules, no honor points, no second-place medals. Your opponent goes down, or you do. Under her guidance, Ethan learned to use his environment as a weapon to identify escape routes instinctively and to recognize the subtle signs that preceded violence. The family's next assignment took them to Fort Bragg in North Carolina, where 12-year-old Ethan encountered Master Sergeant Thompson, a former Army Ranger whose approach to teaching young people focused on mental preparation as much as physical technique. Thompson's classes took place in a converted warehouse behind the family housing area, where he taught the children of deployed soldiers how to stay safe in their parents' absence. The most dangerous moment in any fight, Thompson would tell them while they practiced defensive combinations against heavy bags, is when you think you're winning. That's when you get careless. That's when you forget that your real goal isn't to hurt someone else. It's to protect yourself and get home safe. His lessons emphasized restraint, de-escalation, and the heavy responsibility that came with knowing how to cause serious harm. Ethan's most intensive training had come during their 2-year assignment to Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington, where his father was stationed with the 1st Special Forces Group. The base's proximity to Seattle meant exposure to urban environments that required different survival skills than the controlled military communities they'd known before. Here, Ethan trained under a rotation of Special Forces operators who taught dependents advanced situational awareness and urban survival techniques. Staff Sergeant Kim, a Korean-American Green Beret with expertise in close-quarters combat, had taken particular interest in Ethan's development. Recognizing the teenager's natural athleticism and tactical mindset, Kim began teaching him boxing fundamentals that emphasized speed, accuracy, and psychological warfare over raw power. Big guys always underestimate technique, Kim had explained. While holding focus mitts for Ethan's combinations, they think size and anger are enough. That's their weakness. You learn to move like water on their attacks, then strike like lightning when they're off balance. Most fights end in 30 seconds if you know what you're doing. Throughout all these assignments and instructors, Ethan's mother Sarah had watched her son's development with a mixture of pride and concern. As a military spouse who had seen the toll that violence could take on families, she insisted that Ethan's training always include lessons on responsibility, restraint, and the moral weight of his growing abilities. Just because you can hurt someone doesn't mean you should, she would remind him after particularly intense training sessions. Your father fights wars so that people like us can live in peace. The skills you're learning aren't for starting trouble, they're for ending it when someone else starts it and you have no other choice. This philosophical foundation had been tested during their final year at Lewis McChord, when 15-year-old Ethan encountered Marcus Webb, a local teenager whose father worked as a civilian contractor on base. Marcus had developed the pattern of targeting military dependents, correctly assuming that most of them would avoid confrontation to prevent their parents from facing professional consequences. The situation had escalated over several weeks, with Marcus and his friends following Ethan home from the base commissary, making threats about what happened to Army brats who thought they were better than locals. The harassment had culminated in a confrontation behind a strip mall near the base, where Marcus had produced a knife and demanded Ethan's wallet and phone. What happened next lasted 20 seconds. Marcus found himself on the ground with a dislocated shoulder and his knife in Ethan's possession before he fully understood what had occurred. Ethan had used a combination of techniques learned from multiple instructors, redirecting Marcus's attack using his momentum against him, and applying just enough force to neutralize the threat without causing permanent damage. The incident had been reported to base security, and while Ethan faced no consequences due to the clear self-defense nature of his actions, his mother had been shaken by how easily her son had handled a potentially lethal situation. It was then that she made him promise to avoid confrontation whenever possible at their next assignment, understanding that his skills had developed beyond what most teenagers could control safely. Now, walking through the hallways of Lincoln Valley High School with his art project clutched against his chest, Ethan carried all of these experiences and lessons with him. His casual scanning of exits, his awareness of spatial relationships between people, his automatic assessment of potential threats. These weren't conscious actions, but ingrained habits developed through years of living in uncertain environments. He understood that Connor Hayes represented a familiar type of challenge, one he'd encountered on every base and in every school. The local dominant figure who viewed new arrivals as either potential allies or necessary enemies. The difference was that in military communities, such conflicts were usually resolved quickly through established hierarchies and adult intervention. In civilian schools, particularly small-town environments like Lincoln Valley, the social dynamics operated by different rules entirely. As Ethan settled into his desk for first period, he reflected on his mother's words from the night before. "This is our chance for a normal life. At least for a few months. No base politics, no deployment. Stress, just regular high school experiences." She had been hopeful that Lincoln Valley would offer them a peaceful interlude before his father's return, a chance to experience civilian normalcy that had been largely absent from Ethan's upbringing. Looking around the classroom at his classmates, most of whom had known each other since elementary school, Ethan realized that his definition of normal might be very different from theirs. While they worried about pop quizzes and weekend plans, he automatically noted the room's 2 exits, identified potential improvised weapons within reach, and assessed which students might be allies or threats in an emergency situation. The irony wasn't lost on him that his extensive training in violence had been intended to keep him safe, but it also set him apart from his peers in ways that made genuine connection nearly impossible. How do you explain to small-town teenagers that you've learned to read micro-expressions for signs of impending aggression, or that you instinctively categorize everyone you meet by their potential threat level? As the teacher began discussing the day's lesson plan, Ethan tried to focus on fitting in, on being the normal high school student his mother hoped he could become. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone overlooks. At Lincoln Valley High School in Oregon, Connor Hayes ruled the hallways like his personal kingdom. Star linebacker, son of the town's wealthiest family, untouchable in every way that mattered. When he spotted the new kid sitting alone, hunched over his sketchbook, Connor saw what he always saw in quiet kids: weakness, easy prey. What Connor didn't know was that this particular quiet kid had learned to fight on military bases across 3 different countries. And when Connor decided to drive his boot into the kid's ribs in that empty stairwell, he made the biggest mistake of his 17 years on this earth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October rain drummed against the windows of Lincoln Valley High School as 16-year-old Ethan Parker navigated the crowded hallways during the morning rush. His navy blue hoodie was pulled up just enough to cast shadows over his face, dark hair falling across his forehead as he moved with deliberate steps between clusters of chattering students. In his arms, he carried a carefully wrapped art project alongside his worn leather messenger bag, the kind his father had brought back from their last station in Germany. Ethan had been at Lincoln Valley for exactly 3 weeks now, ever since his mother, Sarah, had taken the nursing position at the county hospital. Their small apartment on Maple Street was temporary, like everything else in their lives, until his father's deployment ended in 8 months. Master Sergeant David Parker was currently stationed somewhere in the Middle East, sending weekly video calls that never quite bridged the distance between Oregon and whatever classified location the Marines had him protecting this time. Moving was nothing new for Ethan. In his 16 years, he'd called 7 different places home, from Camp Pendleton in California to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, from Fort Bragg in North Carolina to Marine Corps Base, Hawaii. Each move had taught him the same lesson: blend in, keep your head down, and never give anyone a reason to notice you. It was a survival strategy that had served him well across continents and cultures. What his new classmates at Lincoln Valley couldn't see beneath the baggy clothes and quiet demeanor was the lean, muscled frame that came from years of training. Since age 8, when his father first took him to the base gym in Okinawa, Ethan had been learning to defend himself. Not from some movie fantasy, but from the practical reality of being a military kid who sometimes found himself in rough neighborhoods near foreign bases. Krav Maga from an Israeli instructor in Germany. Boxing fundamentals from a retired Army Ranger in North Carolina. Tactical awareness from Marine sergeants who treated preparation like religion. His mother had made him promise, just like she did at every new school, that he wouldn't look for trouble. "We only defend ourselves when there's no other choice," she'd said while helping him unpack his few belongings in their Lincoln Valley apartment. "Your father fights so others don't have to. That's what good men do." Ethan had nodded and meant it, just like he meant it every time before. Lincoln Valley High School felt different from the diverse, structured environments of base schools. Here, social hierarchies ran deeper, carved out over years of shared history that Ethan would never be part of. The building itself was older, with narrow hallways and cracked linoleum that spoke of limited budgets and small-town priorities. Trophy cases lined the main corridor, filled almost exclusively with football memorabilia dating back 30 years. Pictures of championship teams, newspaper clippings about state playoffs, and prominently displayed jerseys that treated the sport less like a game and more like a local religion. At the center of that religion stood Connor Hayes, and everyone knew it. Even from a distance, Ethan could identify the social apex predator of Lincoln Valley. "Hi." Connor moved through the hallways with the easy confidence of someone who had never been challenged, never been told no, never faced a consequence that his family name couldn't fix. At 6'2", with the broad shoulders and thick neck of a linebacker, he wore his leather jacket like armor, the bright gold LV embroidered over his heart catching fluorescent light as he passed. Connor's entourage followed in formation. Jake Morrison with his perfectly styled blonde hair and quarterback's cocky grin. Dylan Cross, whose sharp features and calculating eyes suggested he was the strategist of the group, and Tommy Chen, newest to the inner circle, but eager to prove his belonging through whatever cruelty was required. They commanded attention without asking for it, conversation stopping mid-sentence as they passed, underclassmen stepping aside like subjects before royalty. The Hayes family name carried weight in Lincoln Valley that extended far beyond the school walls. Hayes Auto Empire dominated the local economy, selling cars to 3 counties and sponsoring everything from Little League teams to the annual Harvest Festival. Connor's father, Robert Hayes, sat on the school board, the city council, and the Chamber of Commerce. In a town of 15,000 people, the Hayes family didn't just live in Lincoln Valley, they owned it. Ethan had encountered this type before on various bases: the commander's kid who thought rank was hereditary, the contractor's son who believed money made him bulletproof. The smart play was always the same: maintain distance, avoid interaction, and wait for the inevitable rotation that would take his family somewhere new. 8 months until his father returned. 8 months until they could request a new assignment. 8 months of invisibility. He had almost made it to his first period classroom when he felt eyes on him. Not the casual glances of curious classmates, but the focused attention of someone sizing up prey. Ethan's peripheral vision, trained through years of base security drills, caught Connor Hayes leaning against a row of lockers with his crew. Their conversation paused as they watched him pass. Something in Connor's expression suggested that Ethan's strategy of invisibility might have already failed. The bell rang, signaling the start of another day at Lincoln Valley High. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be different. In his experience, when apex predators started paying attention, It usually meant someone was about to become their next target. What Connor Hayes and his friends couldn't see as they watched Ethan disappear into the morning crowd was the extensive background that had shaped the quiet teenager walking away from them. Behind those careful, measured steps and downcast eyes lay a childhood unlike anything their small Oregon town could imagine. While most kids his age had grown up playing video games and riding bikes around suburban neighborhoods, Ethan Parker had been learning survival skills on some of the most dangerous military installations in the world. His earliest memory was of his father teaching him how to fall properly on the concrete training grounds of Camp Pendleton. He was only 5 years old then, but Master Sergeant David Parker believed in preparing his son for a world that wouldn't always be kind to military families. "You never know where we'll end up, buddy," his father had said, steadying him after a practice roll. "But wherever we go, you'll know how to take care of yourself and protect your mom." The Parker family's nomadic existence had taken them to places most teenagers only saw in geography textbooks. At Ramstein Air Base in Germany, 8-year-old Ethan had trained under Sergeant First Class Mueller, a former German Special Forces operative who taught American military children basic self-defense during their off-duty hours. Mueller's approach was methodical and brutal in its efficiency. No flashy moves or tournament poses, just practical techniques designed to neutralize threats quickly and escape dangerous situations. "Fighting is not about looking good," Mueller had told the small group of military children in heavily accented English. "Fighting's about going home alive. You learn to see danger before it sees you. You learn to end problems before they become bigger problems." The lessons had been disguised as after-school activities, but Ethan understood even then that he was learning skills most children would never need and hopefully never use. When the family transferred to Marine Corps Base Hawaii 2 years later, Ethan continued his unofficial education under Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, a compact woman whose expertise in Krav Maga had been earned through 3 combat deployments. She taught the dependents class with the same intensity she brought to training active-duty Marines, believing that military families faced unique risks that required serious preparation. "Krav Maga isn't a martial art," Rodriguez had explained to her students during their first session in the humid gymnasium overlooking Pearl Harbor. "It's a survival system." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But when Connor Hayes walked past the classroom windows and made deliberate eye contact through the glass, Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest that signaled his training was about to be tested once again. Connor Hayes had woken up that morning with the satisfying knowledge that today would establish his dominance over yet another challenge to his authority. At 17, he had perfected the art of social control through a combination of inherited privilege, athletic prowess, and carefully calculated intimidation. His father's influence provided the foundation. His position as starting linebacker gave him credibility, but it was his willingness to crush anyone who didn't immediately submit that maintained his position at the apex of Lincoln Valley's teenage hierarchy. The Hayes family compound sat on 12 acres overlooking the valley, a sprawling ranch-style mansion that served as a constant reminder of their prominence in the community. Connor's bedroom alone was larger than most family apartments, filled with football trophies, college recruitment letters, and expensive electronics that reflected his status as the heir to a local dynasty. His walk-in closet contained more athletic gear than most sporting goods stores, from custom cleats to team jackets that bore his name and number in gold embroidery. Robert Hayes had built his automotive empire through a combination of shrewd business practices and strategic relationship building that bordered on political maneuvering. Hayes' auto empire didn't just sell cars to Lincoln Valley and the surrounding counties. It sponsored every significant community event, funded the high school's athletic programs, and employed nearly 200 people in a town where good jobs were scarce. When Robert Hayes spoke at city council meetings, people listened with the deference reserved for those who could make or break local prosperity. Connor had absorbed these lessons about power and influence from an early age. He understood that success meant controlling not just resources but people, that leadership required making examples of those who refused to acknowledge their place in the established order. His father had taught him that respect was earned through demonstration of dominance, whether in business negotiations or teenage social dynamics. The Hayes family philosophy extended to Connor's carefully curated inner circle. Jake Morrison's family owned the largest ranch in the county, making him valuable for his connections to the agricultural community that formed Lincoln Valley's economic foundation. Dylan Cross's father served as the town's police chief, providing useful insights into local law enforcement priorities and blind spots. Tommy Chun's parents operated the most successful restaurant in town, making him the newest addition to the group as Connor expanded his influence into the growing Asian business community. Each member of Connor's crew understood their role in maintaining his dominance. Jake provided the muscle and intimidation factor, his 6'4" frame and quick temper serving as an effective deterrent to potential challengers. Dylan contributed strategic thinking and information gathering, his analytical mind helping identify threats before they could develop into serious problems. Tommy brought enthusiasm and a willingness to prove himself through whatever means Connor deemed necessary. Together, they had established an unwritten code that governed social interactions at Lincoln Valley High School. New students were evaluated and categorized within their first week. Potential allies who could enhance their status, irrelevant background players who posed no threat, or challenges that required immediate neutralization. The system had worked flawlessly for 3 years, maintaining Connor's position while eliminating any competition before it could gain momentum. Ethan Parker represented something Connor hadn't encountered before, a quiet confidence that refused to translate into either submission or open challenge. Most new students fell into predictable patterns when confronted with Connor's dominance. The smart ones quickly aligned themselves with his interests, seeking protection through association. The stupid ones tried to challenge him directly and were swiftly crushed through public humiliation and strategic isolation. The majority simply kept their heads down and accepted their place in the established hierarchy, but Ethan seemed different. During his 3 weeks at Lincoln Valley, he had demonstrated an unusual ability to avoid confrontation without appearing weak. When Connor and his friends occupied the cafeteria table Ethan had been using, the new student had simply found another seat without complaint or obvious resentment. When Jake had accidentally bumped into Ethan in the hallway, knocking his books to the floor, Ethan had gathered them quietly and continued on his way without the usual signs of intimidation or anger. Most frustrating was Ethan's refusal to engage with Connor's attempts at establishing dominance through conversation. Direct questions were answered politely but minimally. Attempts at mockery or intimidation were met with neutral acknowledgement rather than defensive responses. It was as if Ethan existed in a social space that Connor's usual tactics couldn't penetrate, creating a puzzle that demanded resolution. Connor's friends had begun to notice this anomaly as well. During their usual pre-practice gathering in the BULLIES weight room, Dylan had raised concerns about the new students' apparent immunity to their standard operating procedures. "There's something off about that Parker kid," Dylan had observed while adjusting the weight on his bench press. "Normal people react when you mess with them. They get angry, scared, defensive, something. But this guy acts like he's not even paying attention." Jake had disagreed, suggesting that Ethan was simply too scared to react normally. "He's probably been bullied before and learned to just take it. Some kids shut down completely when they can't fight back." Tommy, eager to contribute to the discussion, had offered his own theory. Maybe he's one of those weird kids who thinks ignoring bullies makes them go away. Like his mom told him, if he doesn't react, we'll get bored and move on. But Connor had sensed something different in his brief interactions with Ethan. There was a quality to the new student stillness that suggested awareness rather than submission, a way of moving through space that indicated confidence rather than fear. When Connor made threatening gestures or invaded Ethan's personal space, he detected no change in breathing, no tension in posture, no involuntary flinching that typically accompanied successful intimidation. The realization that his standard methods might be ineffective against this particular target had only intensified Connor's determination to establish dominance. His reputation depended on maintaining absolute social control, and any perceived weakness could encourage other potential challengers to test his authority. If word spread that the new kid could ignore Connor Hayes without consequences, it might inspire others to attempt similar defiance. Football practice that afternoon had provided Connor with additional motivation to resolve the Ethan Parker situation. Coach Williams had been particularly critical of the team's recent performance, suggesting that their dominance on the field wasn't translating into the focused aggression needed for their upcoming playoff games. You boys think because you've won a few games you can coast through the rest of the season, Coach Williams had bellowed while they ran conditioning drills in the October rain. But champions aren't made by talent alone. Champions are made by the willingness to destroy anything that stands between them and victory. If you can't establish dominance in every aspect of your lives, you'll never be true winners. The speech had resonated with Connor, who saw his social dominance at school as training for the kind of leadership he would need to succeed in college football and beyond. His father had already arranged meetings with scouts from major universities, emphasizing that athletic ability needed to be coupled with leadership qualities that colleges valued in their recruits. After practice, Connor had outlined his strategy for dealing with Ethan to his assembled crew. The approach would escalate gradually, testing the new student's limits while providing opportunities for submission that would allow both parties to save face. If Ethan proved willing to acknowledge Connor's authority publicly, the situation could be resolved without further conflict. "We start tomorrow," Connor had explained while they changed out of their practice gear. Nothing too serious at first. Just enough pressure to see how he reacts when the stakes get higher. Jake had been enthusiastic about the plan, suggesting they corner Ethan in one of the school's less monitored areas where their conversation wouldn't be interrupted by teachers or administrators. Dylan had recommended gathering intelligence about Ethan's background and family situation, believing that personal information could provide leverage for more effective psychological pressure. Tommy had volunteered to handle surveillance, tracking Ethan's daily routines and identifying patterns that could be exploited for maximum impact. His eagerness to prove himself made him useful for tasks that required persistence and attention to detail. As Connor drove home that evening in his custom-painted pickup truck, a graduation gift from his father that cost more than most families' annual income, he felt the familiar satisfaction that came from having a clear plan for maintaining his dominance. The truck's powerful engine and lifted suspension made it visible from blocks away, serving as a mobile symbol of Hayes' family wealth and Connor's personal status within the community. The evening air carried the scent of autumn leaves and wood. Smoke from the rural property surrounding Lincoln Valley, reminding Connor of the seasonal rhythms that had shaped his entire life in this place. Fall meant football dominance, homecoming celebrations, and the anticipation of another championship season. It meant college scouts in the stands and newspaper articles featuring his photograph. It meant the confirmation of everything his father had taught him about power, success, and the importance of never allowing challenges to his authority to go unanswered. Tomorrow would begin the process of teaching Ethan Parker the same lessons that every other student at Lincoln Valley High School had learned. Connor Hayes ruled this domain, and everyone else existed within the hierarchy he had established and maintained through 3 years of careful dominance. Some people learned these lessons easily, while others required more intensive instruction. But in the end, everyone learned. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that turned Lincoln Valley streets into a maze of puddles and made the walk to school an exercise in careful navigation. Ethan had left his apartment 15 minutes earlier than usual, partly to avoid the worst of the morning rush, but mostly because he'd spent another restless night thinking about the inevitable confrontation he'd seen building in Connor Hayes's eyes. His mother had already left for her early shift at the hospital, but not before leaving a note on the kitchen counter reminding him to keep your head down and focus on your studies. She'd also packed extra food in his lunch, the way she always did when she sensed he was stressed about something. Sarah Parker had developed an intuitive understanding of her son's moods over the years of constant relocations and new school adjustments. The art project tucked carefully in Ethan's messenger bag represented 3 weeks of meticulous work for Mr. Davidson's advanced studio class. It was a mixed media piece exploring themes of displacement and belonging, incorporating sketches from all the places he'd lived with fragments of maps, ticket stubs, and photographs that told the story of a nomadic military childhood. The assignment had been to create something that represented home, and Ethan had struggled with the concept before deciding that home wasn't a place, but a collection of experiences and memories. As he approached Lincoln Valley High School, Ethan noticed Connor Hayes's distinctive pickup truck already parked in its usual spot near the main entrance. The vehicle sat like a territorial marker, its imposing presence serving notice that the school's alpha predator had arrived and claimed his domain. Other students naturally gave the truck a wide berth, understanding the unspoken rules about respect and proximity to power symbols. The morning hallway routine at Lincoln Valley followed predictable patterns that Ethan had observed and cataloged during his 3 weeks of attendance. Students clustered in familiar groups near their lockers, engaged in conversations that rarely included anyone outside their established social circles. Teachers moved purposefully between classrooms, carrying coffee cups and looking perpetually overwhelmed by the challenges of educating teenagers in an underfunded rural district. Ethan's locker was located in what he'd mentally designated as neutral territory, far enough from Connor's usual gathering spots to avoid unwanted attention but close enough to major thoroughfares that he could move quickly between classes. He'd deliberately chosen the combination 187644, numbers that corresponded to military time zones he'd lived in, a small private connection to his father's world that helped him feel grounded in unfamiliar environments. The first sign that today would be different came as Ethan was transferring books between his locker and messenger bag. Jake Morrison appeared at the adjacent locker, which Ethan knew belonged to a junior girl named Ashley who was currently in the infirmary with food poisoning. Jake's presence in that specific location wasn't coincidental, and Ethan recognized the tactical positioning for what it was: preparation for a controlled encounter. "Hey there, new guy," Jake said, with artificial friendliness that didn't extend to his eyes. "Connor's been wanting to have a real conversation with you. Welcome you to Lincoln Valley properly." Ethan continued organizing his materials without looking up, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Years of military base experience had taught him that showing fear or urgency only encouraged predators to escalate their tactics. "I appreciate the thought," he replied quietly, "but I'm good. Just trying to get to class on time." Jake's laugh had an edge to it that suggested genuine amusement at Ethan's response. "See, that's the thing about Lincoln Valley. We've got our own way of doing things here. When Connor Hayes wants to talk to someone, it's not really optional." The conversation was drawing attention from nearby students who had developed an instinctive ability to recognize the early stages of social confrontation. Most continued their own activities while maintaining peripheral awareness of the interaction, understanding that witnessing such events could be useful for navigating their own positions within the school's complex hierarchy. Dylan cross-materialized. On Ethan's other side, completing a pincer movement that blocked easy escape routes while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. His presence was more subtle than Jake's obvious intimidation, but equally calculated in its positioning and timing. "The thing is," Dylan said in his characteristic analytical tone, "you've been here 3 weeks and haven't really made any effort to fit in. That's unusual for new students. Most people want to establish connections, find their place in the community. But you seem content to just float through like you're invisible." Ethan recognized the psychological probing for what it was, an attempt to gather information about his motivations and mindset, while applying social pressure disguised as friendly concern. It was a sophisticated approach that suggested Connor's crew had more tactical awareness than typical high school bullies. "Some people are just more social than others," Ethan replied, closing his locker with precise movements that didn't betray the tension he felt building in his shoulders. "I'm here to learn, not to join popularity contests." The response seemed to satisfy something in Dylan's assessment, as if it confirmed a theory he'd been developing about Ethan's personality. Tommy Chun had joined the group during the exchange, completing Connor's usual formation and ensuring that Ethan was effectively surrounded without the arrangement appearing overtly threatening to potential faculty observers. "Connor thinks you might be confused about how things work around here," Tommy said, his voice carrying the eager intensity of someone trying to prove himself worthy of inclusion in the dominant group. "Maybe you went to schools where keeping to yourself was okay, but Lincoln Valley is different. We're a community, and communities look out for each other." The subtext was clear. Communities also policed their members and dealt with those who refused to acknowledge established social contracts. Ethan understood that he was being offered a choice between voluntary submission and involuntary instruction. In local power dynamics, the warning bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until first period. But none of Connor's crew showed any indication of moving toward their respective classrooms. Their willingness to risk tardiness for this confrontation suggested that establishing dominance over Ethan had become a priority that superseded normal school obligations. "Look," Jake said, adopting a tone of reasonable explanation, "Connor's not unreasonable. He just wants to make sure you understand how things work. Lincoln Valley's got its own culture, its own traditions. The football team, the social structure, the way respect gets earned and maintained. It's nothing personal against you, but new people need to show they can fit in with what we've got going." Ethan shifted his messenger bag to ensure the art project remained protected while considering his response options. Direct confrontation would escalate the situation beyond what these preliminary probes were designed to accomplish. Complete submission would establish a precedent that would make his remaining time at Lincoln Valley increasingly difficult. He needed to find a middle path that postponed serious conflict without appearing weak or afraid. "I'm not looking to change anything," Ethan said, making brief eye contact with each member of the group to demonstrate that he wasn't intimidated by their numbers or positioning. "I'm here for 8 months while my dad finishes his deployment. Then we'll probably move again. I'm not interested in stepping on anyone's territory or challenging how things work." The mention of military deployment created a momentary pause in the group's dynamic, as if they were processing this new information and adjusting their assessment accordingly. Military families were common enough in Oregon that the reference wouldn't seem unusual, but it also suggested connections to authority structures that operated outside local influence. Dylan seemed particularly interested in this development, his analytical mind working through the implications of having a military dependent in their midst. "Where's your dad stationed?" he asked, and Ethan detected genuine curiosity beneath the continued tactical positioning. "Classified deployment," Ethan replied truthfully, knowing that the vague answer would satisfy their curiosity, while providing no useful information for whatever psychological profile they were building. "He'll be back next summer." Tommy's expression shifted slightly, suggesting that the military connection had altered his perception of Ethan as a target. Having grown up in a small town with traditional respect for military service, he seemed less comfortable with the idea of harassing a deployed soldier's son. Jake, however, appeared unimpressed by the revelation. "Military brat, huh? That explains the attitude. Thinking you're better than the locals because daddy wears a uniform." The comment was designed to provoke an emotional response, to push Ethan into defending his father's service and thereby providing the kind of reaction that would justify escalated harassment. It was a sophisticated psychological tactic that revealed more planning than Ethan had initially credited Connor's crew with possessing. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Ethan said calmly, recognizing the trap and avoiding it. "I just want to finish my classes and stay out of trouble." The second warning bell rang, creating natural pressure for the conversation to conclude. But Dylan raised a hand in a gesture that suggested the interaction wasn't finished. "Here's the thing, Parker. Staying out of trouble in Lincoln Valley means understanding the social structure. Connor's not just the star linebacker, he's the guy who keeps order around here. When he wants to talk to someone, it's because he's looking out for the whole community." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the essential message: submit to Connor's authority or face consequences that would make Ethan's remaining time at Lincoln Valley increasingly unpleasant. It was a familiar ultimatum delivered with local variations but fundamentally identical to power challenges he'd encountered on military bases around the world. "When does Connor want to have this conversation?" Ethan asked, accepting the inevitability of direct confrontation, while buying time to prepare mentally for whatever form it would take. Jake's grin suggested satisfaction with Ethan's apparent capitulation to their demands. "Lunch period. East wing stairwell, second floor. Just Connor and you, nice and private where you can work things out like gentlemen." The location choice was tactical, Ethan realized. The East wing stairwell was one of the least monitored areas in the school, removed from main traffic patterns and faculty supervision. Whatever Connor planned to say or do would occur without witnesses who might complicate the narrative afterward. "I'll be there," Ethan said, understanding that refusal would only escalate the timeline and intensity of the inevitable confrontation. As Connor's crew dispersed toward their respective classes, Ethan remained at his locker for an additional moment, ostensibly organizing his materials, but actually centering himself mentally for what was to come. The morning's interaction had confirmed his assessment that Connor Hayes operated with more sophistication than typical school bullies, employing psychological tactics and strategic planning that suggested serious commitment to maintaining his dominant position. The art project in his messenger bag seemed suddenly fragile, representing not just 3 weeks of careful work, but also his mother's hopes for a peaceful transition during his father's deployment. In 8 hours, he would face a confrontation that could determine whether his remaining months at Lincoln Valley High School proceeded smoothly or became an extended campaign of harassment and escalation. The lunch bell echoed through Lincoln Valley High's corridors as Ethan made his way toward the East Wing stairwell, his art project still carefully protected in his messenger bag. The hallways buzzed with typical midday energy as students rushed toward the cafeteria or gathered in their usual social clusters. Ethan's pace remained steady and measured, drawing no attention from the flowing crowd around him. Connor Hayes was already waiting when Ethan reached the second-floor landing, leaning casually against the concrete wall with his arms crossed. The stairwell was exactly as isolated as promised, with thick fire doors muffling the sounds from the main hallways. Connor had positioned himself strategically, blocking the upward path while leaving the downward exit theoretically open. "Glad you showed up, Parker," Connor said, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to having his summons obeyed. "Shows you've got some sense after all." Ethan stopped 3 steps below the landing, maintaining distance while demonstrating that he wasn't afraid to engage. You wanted to talk, so let's talk. Connor's expression shifted slightly, perhaps expecting more deference or nervousness from someone facing a private confrontation with Lincoln Valley's undisputed alpha. See, here's the thing. My friends tell me you're not really trying to fit in around here. That's a problem. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Ethan recognized it as both a test and an opening offer for submission. Connor was providing an opportunity for Ethan to acknowledge his authority and negotiate terms for peaceful coexistence. I'm not trying to cause problems for anyone, Ethan replied evenly. I just want to finish the school year and move on. Connor pushed off from the wall, taking a step down toward Ethan. But that's exactly the problem, isn't it? You think you can just drift through Lincoln Valley without participating in our community. That's not how it works here. The physical movement was calculated intimidation, designed to test whether Ethan would retreat or stand his ground. Ethan remained motionless, neither advancing nor backing down, his body language neutral but alert. What exactly do you want from me? Ethan asked. Connor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Respect. Recognition that this is my school, my territory. My rules. When I speak, you listen. When I make suggestions, you follow them. Simple as that. The demand was explicit now, stripping away the euphemisms his crew had used that morning. Connor wanted public submission, a demonstration that would reinforce his dominance while establishing Ethan's place in the hierarchy. And if I don't agree to that arrangement? Ethan asked, genuinely curious about Connor's escalation strategy. Connor's laugh was harsh and humorless. Then you learn the hard way that some lessons hurt more than others. Without warning, Connor moved down. 2 more steps and shoved Ethan hard in the chest with both hands. The sudden violence was designed to catch Ethan off guard, to send him tumbling down the concrete stairs in a fall that would look accidental to any potential witnesses. But Ethan's body reacted with the trained reflexes of years spent learning to absorb and redirect kinetic energy. He absorbed the impact by shifting his weight backward, then used Connor's extended arms as leverage points to maintain his balance. In one fluid motion, he caught Connor's wrists, stepped to the side, and guided the larger boy's momentum past him. Connor stumbled down 3 steps before catching himself against the handrail, his face flushed with surprise and embarrassment. For the first time in their interaction, he looked genuinely shaken. Lucky catch, Connor snarled, turning back toward Ethan with murder in his eyes. But when he looked up, he found Ethan standing exactly where he'd been before, hands at his sides, expression unchanged. There was no gloating, no aggressive posturing, just the same calm awareness that had characterized their entire conversation. I don't want to fight you, Ethan said quietly. Connor's rage intensified at what he perceived as condescension. Too late for that, Parker. He charged up the stairs, throwing a wild right hook aimed at Ethan's head. Again, Ethan's training took over. He slipped the punch with minimal movement, causing Connor to overextend and lose balance. A gentle push at the right moment sent Connor stumbling sideways into the wall. The sound of Connor's shoulder hitting concrete echoed in the stairwell, followed by a string of profanity that revealed both his frustration and his growing desperation. He'd thrown his best punch and not only missed, but been made to look clumsy in the process. This isn't over, Connor promised, breathing heavily as he backed toward the fire door. His bravado was intact, but something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between them. Ethan watched him leave without comment, then slowly made his way down the stairs toward the cafeteria. His art project had remained protected throughout the encounter, and he felt a small satisfaction in having avoided both serious violence and complete submission to Connor's demands. But as he walked through the hallways, Ethan knew that the real confrontation was still coming. Connor Hayes wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and their private encounter had only delayed the inevitable escalation. The question now was whether Connor would come alone next time, or whether Ethan would find himself facing the coordinated assault of the entire crew. Either way, his mother's hopes for a peaceful school year were about to be tested in ways that neither of them had anticipated when they'd moved to this quiet Oregon town. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.